Hi everybody. While we're under lockdown and having to stay at home and unable to meet together for church service, I thought it was a good time for us to think about what church actually is. What do you think of when you think of church? Do you think of a building? Do you think of a group of people? Do you think of a church service? Do you think of all the Christians around the world? What do you think of? What is church? I'm going to spend a few minutes now thinking about what the church actually is. The word church in the Bible literally refers to a gathering or an assembly. In fact, in Acts 19 verse 32, there is what is essentially a riot, and that's referred to as an assembly, the same word as church. And so a church is a gathering or an assembly of people. And the Bible talks about this idea in 1 Corinthians 11:20. It says, when you come together. Physical gathering of people. They're talking about communion and how to do that, but a physical coming together of people. And what that means is that what we did this Sunday just been, when we all tuned in from home and watch on YouTube, that isn't the essence of what church is. Church is physically gathering together, and we were separate. And so fundamentally, to have a church, you need believers gathering together. Of course, the word in the church in the New Testament refers to more than just local churches. It can refer to all the Christians in a particular area. We might say the church in Auckland, referring to all the Christians in Auckland, all the churches in Auckland. But it can also refer to all the Christians, full stop. Ephesians 5:25 says, Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. In that verse, the church is more than just one local gathering. It's the whole church. But overwhelmingly in the New Testament, when it talks about the church, it refers to local, physical gatherings of people. So Papakura Baptist Church is the people who gather regularly together, who physically come together. That's who we are as a church. It's not the building, it's not the organization, it's not the leadership, it's the people who are there on Sunday morning. So the church is a gathered people, and the church is a people gathered to Jesus. Hebrews 12 talks about the Old Testament and how the people of Israel came to Mount Sinai with Moses and received the law, how God gathered them then, but now God gathers his people around Jesus, the assembly of the firstborn, the church of the firstborn, those enrolled in heaven, as verse 23 puts it. The church is those who have come to Jesus, the mediator of this new covenant, the one who has sprinkled us with his blood for the forgiveness of sins. And so the church is a gathered people, but it's a people gathered to Jesus Christ. And so Christ must be central to our gathering. You can see it in the Bible's instructions to local gatherings. There are two ordinances that the church is given to do, two things which local churches are expected to do, and those two things are communion and baptism. Communion and baptisms are what churches are meant to be doing, and they both show the centrality of Jesus. Baptism and communion are both recollections and reenactments of the gospel, and we're meant to practice those as a church to remind one another and to proclaim the gospel. And we might talk more about those in the coming weeks. And so the church is a gathering, a physical gathering of people to Jesus. Now you might think, that's great, but why is it important? And the reason it's important is because this gathering of people to Jesus is actually God's big plan. That's what God is doing in the world. When we come to Revelation and we get a sneak peek into what heaven is, this is what we see. Chapter 7, verse 9 of Revelation. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. So what we do, Papakura Baptists, what local churches are doing each Sunday morning as they gather, that is what God is doing with all of creation. That's God's plan, to gather people around Jesus. And so our church service on a Sunday morning, while it may not feel that impressive, is what creation is headed for. It's sort of like this week we all met online and did church online, so to speak, and while there were similarities between the online video and our actual church, there was a lot missing. It was a taste of our normal service, but it was not the actual thing. And in the same way, our local church, as we meet on a Sunday morning, it's a taste of heaven. That's what it's gonna be like what we do on a Sunday morning when we get to heaven and everybody is gathered around the throne. It's not going to be exactly the same. I don't think it's going to be an endless church service, but it will be people from every tribe, tongue and nation gathered around Jesus. Now that's a lot to think about. So you'll have some questions that will help you think about this a bit more. But for now, I wanted to encourage you with that. So that when the lockdown ends, we don't think, watching church online, that was good, maybe we should keep doing that. We'll know and be excited to meet together physically, to hear about the gospel and proclaim the gospel, because we'll know that's a reflection of heaven. Our church service, gathering together around Jesus, is God's plan for the world. And when we finally get to do that again, that's what we'll be doing, gathering around the throne of the Lamb to worship, gathering around Jesus to worship. We have that privilege, that foretaste of heaven. And so while we're locked down, let's look forward to that. Thank you.